imagine you're sitting at a desk, grading papers, and a note just gets slipped into your door.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, it's a death threat. And it explicitly says that if you don't give a passing grade to this one specific, highly unqualified student, you and your family are going to be harmed.
It's just a terrifying scenario.
It really is.
Yeah.
So do you pass the student to protect your life, or do you fail them because, like, the absolute law of justice demands it?
It's the ultimate collision, really, between high-minded philosophy and just brutal reality. Because when you strip away the inspirational classroom posters and, the neatly arranged desks, you realize education isn't just about memorizing facts.
Right.
It's this active crucible. It's where we test what a society truly values when the stakes are at their absolute highest.
Welcome to today's deep dive.
Yeah.
If you're tuning in, I know exactly who you are. You're a learner. You're the kind of person who doesn't just want to know what happened. You want to know the invisible wiring of why it happened. And today's stack of source material is, well, it's a fascinating one. We're looking at a comprehensive review guide for the Philippine Licensure Examination for Teachers, or the LET. But let me be perfectly clear here. We are not here to cram for a standardized test.
No, far from it. We're actually using this exam guide as like a concentrated distillation of human thought.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Because the frameworks required to pass this exam, they're the exact same invisible frameworks that dictate how we're governed, how we process information, and honestly, how we justify our most difficult moral choices.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can even begin to talk about how to teach a human being, it seems like the sources are demanding we answer a much weirder question, like what is actually real?
It is a huge question.
It is. I was reading through the sections on classical philosophy, and it feels like every single teaching method just stems from how a specific thinker defines reality itself.
That's the foundational mechanism of all education, really. You can't decide how to mold a mind until you figure out what that mind is interacting with.
Makes sense.
So historically, the starting point for this debate is idealism. And if you operate from this framework, the physical world, desks, whiteboards, textbooks, is essentially an illusion.
Wait, an illusion?
Yeah, it's just a flawed shadow of the true reality, which, to an idealist, consists entirely of pure, perfect ideas.
I'm trying to picture how that actually works mechanically in a classroom, though. Like, if physical stuff doesn't matter, how do you teach?
Right.
The source mentions that under idealism, learning isn't about pouring new facts into a student's head. It's about drawing out latent ideas that already exist inside them. But how does a teacher actually trigger a latent idea?
By focusing relentlessly on moral and spiritual development rather than just rote data. And we see a brilliant, highly specific example of this in the Philippine context.
Oh, the Jose Rizal example.
Yes, exactly. The curriculum places a massive emphasis on studying the life of Jose Rizal, the national hero. Now, an idealist teacher doesn't just make students memorize the dates of his life or, the exact geographic coordinates of his travels.
Because those are just physical facts.
Precisely. They're temporal, they are secondary. The teacher uses the narrative of Rizal's sacrifice to awaken a latent moral capacity in the student. The whole mechanism is emulation.
Wow, okay.
By grappling with this ultimate ideal of patriotism and spiritual fortitude, the student's own internal, pre-existing moral compass gets activated.
So, if I'm understanding this correctly, my analogy for idealism would be, it's like studying the architectural blueprint of a perfect house.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like you never actually build it, but you just obsess over the concept, the flawless geometry, the pure idea of shelter. But then, the source immediately pivots to realism, which feels like the total inversion of that blueprint idea.
It is. Realism looks at the idealists and firmly rejects the blueprint. Realists argue that the ultimate undeniable reality is the world of physical objects.
The stuff you can touch.
Exactly. Truth is an objective order. It exists completely independently of whether a human mind is thinking about it or not. A rock is a rock. A planet is a planet.
Right, so in this framework, you drop the blueprints and you get your hands dirty counting the actual physical bricks. You weigh them, you measure their density.
Yes.
And this explains why the realist classroom prioritizes organized, systematically arranged subjects. Like, math and science take absolute precedence over literature and philosophy because they're the languages we use to decode the concrete physical universe.
That's spot on. And for centuries, institutional learning just kind of swung like a pendulum between those two poles.
The invisible blueprint of the soul or the tangible bricks of the physical world.
Exactly. But as we move into the modern era, the sources highlight this massive mechanical shift in how we approach knowledge. Because eventually, thinkers realized that just contemplating blueprints or categorizing bricks wasn't actually solving dynamic real-world problems.
Which brings us to pragmatism.
Yes, pragmatism.
And pragmatism completely flips the script on truth. From what I gather in the text, pragmatists just don't care if an idea is eternally pure or physically objective. Truth is simply whatever works.
It's entirely defined by its practical consequence.
Right. And the source highlights William James navigating the Amazon River on these scientific expeditions, which feels like the ultimate embodiment of this. He isn't sitting in a lecture hall theorizing about river currents. He's out there testing if his navigation theories actually keep the boat afloat.
What's fascinating here is how this shifts the entire sequence of learning. Think about a traditional realist classroom.
Okay.
You learn the theory first, you memorize it, and maybe apply it later. But the pragmatists insist that experience must follow learning immediately. You encounter a real problem, you deploy a theory, and if the theory fails to solve the problem, you discard it.
So truth is mutable.
Completely mutable.
Yeah.
And this concept is the engine for progressivism, which was championed heavily by John Dewey. He argued that education is not preparation for life, education is life.
I really want to dig into how this drastically alters the power dynamics of a classroom. The text introduces this hypothetical scenario with Teacher Myra.
Oh, the billiards example.
Yes. The progressivist philosophy says, if you have students who are completely disengaged with abstract geometry on a chalkboard, but they're obsessed with playing billiards, you don't force them back to the chalkboard.
No, you bring the billiards table into the classroom.
Exactly. You capitalize entirely on the child's lived experience and use the momentum of their own interests to teach them the angles.
It completely dethrones the subject matter. Under realism, the mathematics was king, and the student had to conform to the math. Under progressivism, the student is the center of gravity, and the curriculum bends to fit their reality.
But wait, if we push that logic further, we kind of hit a wall. If the curriculum constantly bends to the individual student's interests, how much freedom does that student actually have? Where does it end?
That's the big question.
Like if the student decides they just don't care about billiards or math, do we just let them walk away?
And that is the exact friction point that leads us to existentialism. If you take that individual freedom and stretch it to its absolute philosophical limit, you arrive at the assertion that existence precedes essence.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning there's no pre-written destiny, no fixed human nature, and no inherent value in any subject matter until the individual assigns it value.
So you're basically born onto an empty stage and you have to write your own script.
Precisely.
The source text has this compelling example of an existentialist art teacher. In a normal classroom, you'd grade a painting on its sensory appeal, right? Like, does it look nice? Did they use the right brushstrokes?
Sure.
But the existentialist teacher completely ignores that. They grade the artwork based solely on its uniqueness and the level of personal responsibility the student took in creating it. They're measuring self-actualization, not skill.
Which is a beautiful concept for individual liberation, but incredibly dangerous for a functioning infrastructure.
Yeah, I can see that.
I mean, if everyone is radically free to define their own reality and reject standardized knowledge, the societal machine breaks down. And this triggers a severe, inevitable backlash known as essentialism.
Right, essentialism is like the ultimate back-to-basics hammer.
It really is.
The exam guide points out that these advocates demand highly structured schooling, longer days, and rigid discipline. They're aiming for social efficiency. There's this phrase in the text that perfectly captures their mindset. Specialization is knowing more and more about less and less. They want to drill down into a core set of immovable skills.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can see why this backlash happens. We're forced to move away from the philosophy of the individual mind and enter the realm of sociology.
Because you have to manage the group.
Exactly. How do you take hundreds of thousands of existential, radically free individuals and forge them into a society that doesn't just collapse?
And the sources outline a few sociological paradigms for this, starting with functionalist theory. This views society like a biological organism. It's an interdependent system where every organ has to do its job.
Right.
So education's role here is to manufacture moral unity. It forces children to absorb basic, shared values so that they can eventually, plug into the societal machine and keep it running smoothly.
But not everyone believes that machine is benevolent. Conflict theory, which is rooted in thinkers like Marx and Weber, looks at that exact same educational system and sees a sophisticated trap.
A trap.
Yes. They argue that society is not held together by shared moral unity, but by tension, class struggle, and the perpetual coercion of the weak by the powerful. In this paradigm, schools are mechanisms designed to perpetuate complex hierarchies.
So they're just sorting people.
Exactly. They distribute status lifestyles to ensure the elite stay elite, and the working class learns just enough to be productive, but not enough to challenge the system.
I struggle with this because it is so incredibly bleak. Like, if we accept the conflict theory premise that the entire educational apparatus is just a rigged game designed to keep us in our respective socioeconomic boxes, then how does anything ever improve?
It's a dark view for sure.
Are we just structurally doomed to repeat these inequalities forever?
That sense of doom is exactly what birthed Reconstructionism. This is the paradigm shift where thinkers, particularly Paulo Freire, argued that schools must become active, hostile laboratories for social reform.
Oh, right, Freire.
Yes, he was famously militant against what he called the banking system of education.
And the banking system. This is the model where a student is treated as an empty bank account, and the teacher simply deposits authorized facts into their head. It basically forces the student to be entirely passive.
Exactly. The student is pacified by the deposits. So to break the cycle, Freire introduced the mechanism of conscientization, or the awakening of critical consciousness.
Conscientization.
Right. The goal isn't to deposit facts, it's to agitate the mind. You teach a student to read not so they can follow instructions, but so they can decode the economic and social oppression surrounding them and eventually dismantle those hierarchies.
It is a totally revolutionary mandate.
Yeah.
But this brings up a massive logistical problem.
Oh.
Well, whether you're trying to build harmonious moral unity or awaken fierce social revolutionaries or just teach a kid math using a billiards table, you still have to figure out how to physically rewire the human brain to accept these lessons. Like, we have to look at the mechanics of psychology.
We do. And to set a global baseline, our source references UNESCO's 4 Pillars of Learning.
Okay.
They mandate that modern education must teach learners to know, to do, to live together, which is their explicit path to global peace, and to be, which focuses on uncovering hidden talents. It's a lofty, holistic vision, but the psychological mechanisms required to actually achieve those pillars are deeply contested.
And the most ruthless mechanical approach here is behaviorism. To a pure behaviorist, the mind is a black box. They don't care about your latent spiritual ideas, your existential freedom, or your critical consciousness.
None at all.
They define learning strictly as a visible, measurable change in behavior caused by environmental stimuli.
The source illustrates this with a seemingly innocent example of operant conditioning. A mother gives her boy his favorite snack every time he cleans his room. It sounds mundane, but the mechanism is profound.
Because of the timing.
Right. By providing a pleasant consequence immediately following a behavior, that behavior is strengthened. The mother is not appealing to the child's inner sense of duty or morality. She is using mechanical reinforcement to close off other behavioral options.
It is the exact same mechanism as a video game reward system.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. When you pick up a controller for the first time, you don't read the game's source code to understand its philosophy. You just push a button. And if the game gives you a pleasant chime and a burst of points, your brain chemically logs that action as correct. You learn the complex mechanics of the game purely through immediate, localized feedback.
Which is incredibly effective for base-level habituation. But cognitive psychologists realize this model is far too simplistic for advanced human reasoning.
Enter Albert Bandura.
Exactly. Bandura's social learning theory proved that the brain doesn't always need to experience the direct reward itself. We have the cognitive capacity to learn by observing others model behavior and anticipating the consequences based on their outcomes.
And Jean Piaget mapped out how the architecture of the brain actually evolves to handle this complex data. The exam guide uses this brilliant example to explain Piaget's concept of assimilation. A child sees a horse for the first time, points at it, and calls it a dog.
It's a perfect demonstration of cognitive mechanics.
Right.
The child has constructed a mental framework, a schema for a 4-legged furry animal, and labeled it dog. When the environment presents a novel stimulus, the brain's first instinct isn't to build a new framework.
It's too much work.
Yes, its first instinct is efficiency. It forces the new contradictory information into the pre-existing schema. It assimilates the data.
The brain literally says, I don't know what that is, so it must just be a really big dog. And this cognitive framing is crucial Jerome Bruner also factors in here with his stages of representation.
Ah, the iconic stage.
Yeah. He points out that during the iconic stage, the brain simply cannot process abstract verbal data on its own. The teacher absolutely must provide visual diagrams and charts. If you don't provide the visual anchor, the verbal information just washes over them without being encoded.
But the psychology becomes precarious when you realize how easily these cognitive mechanisms can be accidentally manipulated. The exam guide heavily emphasizes two specific environmental traps that ruin these pure theories.
The Pygmalion effect and the Hawthorne effect.
Yes.
I found the mechanics of the Pygmalion effect to be genuinely unsettling. It's a phenomenon where a teacher's internal unspoken expectations become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's wild.
If a teacher secretly believes a student is highly intelligent, they will unconsciously give that student more time to answer questions, warmer body language, and more detailed feedback. The student's brain absorbs those environmental cues, their confidence surges, and their performance actually increases. The expectation physically alters the reality.
And conversely, the Hawthorne effect alters reality through surveillance. A subject will completely change their behavior simply because they are aware they're being observed.
Like when the boss walks in.
Exactly. A chaotic classroom will suddenly become perfectly silent and disciplined the second the principal walks through the door. It proves that human behavior in a learning environment is never purely natural. It's always reacting to the perceived parameters of observation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because everything we've discussed so far, the philosophical ideals, the sociological paradigms, the cognitive mechanics, all of that is neat and tidy when it's written in a textbook. But the real world is incredibly messy.
Very true.
How do these invisible frameworks survive when they slam into intense cultural flaws, legal red tape, and literal life-or-death stakes?
We have to ground this in the highly specific legal and cultural context provided by the Philippine Exam Guide. From a legal standpoint, the stakes are codified at the highest level.
It's the Constitution.
Right. The 1987 Philippine Constitution mandates that the state must assign the highest budgetary priority to education. It is legally recognized as the primary engine for national survival and development. So, to protect the integrity of that engine, there is an unyielding code of ethics for professional teachers.
And the text makes it clear that the rules are absolute. A teacher can never, under any circumstance, accept gifts from learners or parents in exchange for requested concessions.
Never.
It also specifically addresses the complexities of human nature, noting that if a mutual attraction develops between a teacher and a learner, the teacher must exercise the utmost professional discretion to avoid scandal, gossip, or preferential treatment. The ethical boundaries are cast in iron.
They are.
But the cultural traps mentioned in the source are where the psychology really clashes with reality.
The guide forces educators to navigate deeply ingrained cultural behaviors that actively undermine the learning process.
The perfect example given is the cultural trait of prioritizing forma, which translates to form over substance.
Oh, this one is fascinating.
A student knows they haven't done the work. They write a factually terrible, plagiarized research report. But instead of fixing the substance, they spend a massive amount of money and time binding the report in an incredibly ornate, expensive folder with elaborate graphics.
Because they're attempting to use aesthetic form to visually manipulate the teacher's grading mechanism, masking the intellectual void.
Exactly. And similarly, the text warns against a specific escapist attitude regarding high-stakes testing. A student will spend months refusing to engage with the material, completely abandoning the pragmatist requirement of disciplined preparation.
Right, just avoiding it.
Instead, they spend the hour immediately before the licensure exam, frantically praying for a miracle. They're attempting to bypass the physical reality of their own ignorance by treating faith as a magical intervention rather than a source of moral strength.
Which brings us all the way back to the ultimate dilemma we opened the show with, the case of teacher Nancy.
The death threat.
Yes. She is facing an active death threat from a syndicate or powerful family, demanding she pass an undeserving student. If she fails him, the threat of physical violence to her and her family is highly credible.
This raises an important question, one that forces us to choose which philosophical framework we truly serve. When an absolute moral principle collides with physical survival, what algorithm dictates your action?
It's the impossible choice.
If you operate under the framework of a perfect duty, which is like an absolute universal rule of justice, similar to paying a worker their exact agreed-upon wages without exception, the calculation is stark. You have to fail the student.
Falsifying the grade corrupts the entire educational apparatus and violates the fundamental law of truth.
Right, it's the right thing to do, regardless of the physical consequences. But the text explores an entirely different ethical calculation, utilitarianism.
And utilitarianism strips away the romance of absolute justice. It states that an action is morally right only if it promotes the greatest amount of total happiness and minimizes harm for everyone affected. So in this agonizing scenario, a strict utilitarian calculation would actually advise teacher Nancy to alter the grade and pass the student.
Which feels like a total betrayal of everything a teacher stands for. I mean, it feels inherently corrupt.
It feels corrupt because it violates our idealist blueprints. But the utilitarian looks at the mechanics of the outcome. Failing the student results in violence, trauma, the potential death of the teacher, and devastation to her family, yielding massive negative utility.
Yeah.
Passing the student compromises the integrity of one transcript, sure, but it keeps the teacher alive, secures her family's safety, and avoids violence. The utilitarian framework concludes that the preservation of life vastly outweighs the preservation of academic integrity.
Wow.
It just highlights the brutal, agonizing reality of making ethical choices in a flawed world.
It is a staggering reminder that the classroom is not a vacuum. You are constantly forced to navigate the space between the pure ideal and the grim reality. Well, we have covered immense territory today. We've traced these invisible frameworks from the ancient Socratic methods of extracting latent ideas, down the Amazon River to test pragmatic truths, into the cognitive wiring of a child calling a horse a dog, and finally into the agonizing life-or-death ethical calculus governed by constitutional law.
That's a lot to process.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? Why does this matter? Because once you recognize these invisible structures, you become infinitely more powerful in how you navigate the world.
Hold on.
When you sit in a corporate meeting, or try to master a new skill, or consume media, you can ask the crucial questions. Like, is the person presenting this information treating me like an empty bank account to be filled? Are they utilizing behaviorist rewards to manipulate my cognitive schemas? Once you see the framework, you're no longer just a passive subject. You take back control of your own intellectual agency.
And I would leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. We've analyzed how the way a society structures its education is a direct, undeniable mirror of its deepest philosophical beliefs about reality.
But turn that lens inward. What does the way you naturally prefer to learn reveal about your own unwritten philosophy? When you face a complex problem, do you demand a practical, tangible result like a pragmatist? Or do you fiercely defend your radical freedom to define the meaning of the task yourself like an existentialist? The frameworks we discussed today aren't just historical artifacts trapped in a licensure exam guide. They are the operating systems running inside your own mind.
I absolutely love that. The next time you try to learn something new, ask yourself, are you searching for the perfect blueprint, or are you just trying to count the physical bricks? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning the invisible structures around you and never stop unpacking the reality you're presented with. We will catch you next time.